Good morning. Good morning, Ross Service Coordinators. Welcome to day 2. Did you guys have a good evening yesterday? How about day 1? Was it good? Great. You are in for another treat. We have a wonderful speaker. Yesterday we heard from Allie Hall. Today it's another treat. We're going to hear from Judy Parks, who's going to build on what Allie spoke about yesterday. She is the Vice President for Mobility Mentoring Programs and Services at Empath, which is a Boston-based nonprofit, and she's been working in this space for 25 or more years. So please, let's give her a nice warm welcome with a round of applause.
Thank you, Dina. Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone is good this morning. Just one thing I want to apologize. I have a little bit of a summer cold, so I'm a little bit under the weather here, but not great. But anyway, it's really a pleasure to be here. Dina was kind. I've been working in housing for 40 years of my life. And I've been working in housing in various places, examining and seeing the results of some positive housing policy and some not so positive housing policy. Last week I was at the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota, and that was certainly an eye-opening experience about how we think about the people we serve. So we're going to do a very more positive approach today to thinking about how we work with people. And I think it's really important to talk about a few things, the sort of language and issues and things like that when we get started. One is we talk about resident services, but we really want to be talking about economic mobility and how do we help our residents think about using housing as a platform to achieve economic mobility and to achieve the kind of dreams that they have for themselves. So let's start with a little bit of background here in terms of kind of where we are, and I think this is, again, this is information most of you all know. Housing is a crisis right now in the United States, but unfortunately, it's really absent from the national debate. Last night I did watch some of the debate before I fell asleep anyway, but no one talks about housing. No one talks about the impact of housing on families, the impact of housing on our economy, the impact of housing on our cities and rural areas. But it needs to be part of the debate. We can talk about health care, but if you don't have a place to live, health care can be kind of a question. So I think it's really important that it needs national attention. I know that a lot of local areas and states and cities in particular really focus on housing needs, but it's something that we have to keep reminding everyone. It's a human right to have a place to live, and that we are really involved in supplying that. The other thing is housing in this country has always been an economic ladder. It's a way for some people to be able to climb up that ladder and achieve assets and build better results for themselves and their children. But for others, I think we have to be honest that the discrimination in the housing space has really put them in a disadvantage, which at this point is even more obvious in terms of looking at assets among groups of people. That you look at most African American and Hispanic families versus most white families, their assets are much lower, and their ability to climb that economic ladder has been thwarted through historical redlining and other kind of policies like that. But we have to think about how we can work to help people build those economic ladders for themselves. So really, how can we at this point in time support residents in public housing to use this economic ladder to achieve economic independence and economic mobility? And I like the term economic independence because all of us have, in terms of self-sufficiency, get some support from the government. We either get a tax credit or tax advantage by having a mortgage or some other kind of public support. But the question, but we don't want to count that so much. You want to look at people in public housing as getting something, being a benefit. But really, how do we help people understand that economic independence is what we're really trying to achieve for our families, their right to self-determination and to move in the direction that they want to move for themselves? So how can we partner with our residents to use their voice to advocate for their own economic mobility? And I'm going to stress this word partner because the work that we do at Empath in terms of our whole idea around economic mobility is one of partnership. May I have the next slide, please? Next slide, past that. I'm sorry. I missed all the... So economic mobility. and mobility mentoring. I'm just going to read this. I think it's important to say it out loud. Mobility mentoring, which is something that Empath designed, is a professional practice of partnering with clients so that over time they may acquire the resources, skills, and sustained behavior changes necessary to attain and preserve economic independence. And this notion of partnership is really important in our work because we view ourselves as equal partners, meeting people where they are. And as you know, in any partnership, on some days that load shifts. Some days I carry a little more and you carry a little less. And then, but over time, the whole goal is that that partnership, I become the silent partner and you are the person managing your life and moving forward. So it's really important to have this notion that we are partnering with people and it's their decision and their self-determination that we're working on. And again, we talk about behavior change, and I'm not talking about this in a negative way. I'm talking about helping people enhance their skills, their own ability to have the kind of skills necessary to move forward in terms of attaining the dreams and the outcomes they're trying to achieve. And again, we're looking for economic independence, the ability to answer to yourself rather than continually answer to others. Next slide. I was really glad to see that you had a speaker on motivational interviewing yesterday because motivational interviewing is one of the basic elements in mobility mentoring. But I want to start at the bottom of this pyramid. Unconditional positive regard and trauma-informed coaching. We have done a lot of work working with people at the Center of the Developing Child at Harvard and others around this notion of executive functioning skills and how we can help build executive functioning skills, or I shouldn't say build, but strengthen executive functioning skills with our residents and in ourselves, because executive functioning skills are not exclusive to poverty. They are something we all have to have, and we all want to work and build on as we move forward. So we have to be clear that people who live in trauma or live in the trauma of poverty or violence or any kind of other trauma you want to associate, you build skills to make yourself successful in that environment. So, you know, this fear, the fight, flight, or freeze syndrome people have talked about for years, all these things, they're response mechanisms that we all develop. And there's things that we ourselves do episodically. So if you're in a bad situation, you may just get a brain freeze, or you may just say, I'm gonna assert myself and yell at someone. You may do that, but it's episodic. But if you have to learn to live in an environment where that's constant, it becomes sort of how you work and how you operate. So we have to acknowledge that and think about ways that we can help build skills to strengthen the other kind of executive functioning skills that people need. Unconditional positive regard. There are two things in this work that to me are the heart and soul and the element that we really need to think about when we work with our residents or really anyone. This notion of unconditional positive regard and high expectations. Unconditional positive regard is having absolute unconditional respect for the person you're working with. It doesn't matter who they are, what they look like, the circumstances they're in, their race or ethnicity. We are treating people with respect the way we want someone to respect us. And it's really important in this work because sometimes the environment that our families and our participants live in almost sets the stage for a disconnect with unconditional positive regard. You look at someone and say, how can they live like that? How could they do those things? But you have to be able to extract the person from the environment and talk about the person themselves and deal with them as one-on-one as a human being. And it's really important because this is something I think that it's easy to fall into, but what it brings up for others is that when you treat someone with disrespect or condensation, or just saying, I'm going to do this for you, as opposed to I'm going to help you do this, you bring up lots of things for them, and we're really trying to get the person to think about themselves as a whole individual. So unconditional positive regard also leads to high expectations. Everyone is capable. And the thing that's been most interesting in this work, to understand that, you know, when I was, give my age here, when I was, you know, studying science and things like that, everyone talked about genetics. Oh, you're predisposed. No. You have some abilities from your own genetics, but your environment is what makes you who you are. And we can change the environment, we can enhance the environment, we can better the environment. And so we really have to understand that it's part of our obligation to do that. And so therefore, should have high expectations of everyone. Everyone can do things, and that goes for yourself, your staff, people you work with. I mean, we at Empath, I look at my own staff, and I have high expectations for them. I really see them as learning and growing in the work and being able to really be successful in helping others deliver the kind of outcomes that they're trying to achieve. So again, it's really important to have that. The motivational interviewing, I'm not going to spend a lot of time because you did, but those kind of open-ended questions and the repeating and all of that really is a way of helping people, you know, respond themselves and give answers themselves and have the work come from inside as opposed to something that we're coaching people to do. It's to help people figure out what they need to do and what they want to do themselves. It plays right into the whole notion of this executive functioning informed work, which is really about building these executive functioning skills that all of us can use improvement on. I think it's a kind of a fun thing to do. There are all kinds of executive functioning little quizzes online you can find, but it's good to do one. I'm going to be honest, like for me, memory is a challenge, so I'm a great list maker, and I like to cross them off. There's satisfaction in that with me. Keeping a calendar of things like that. So we see some of these things manifested in our residents, and there are lots of skills that we can help tell them that we use in order to be able to do that. So it's really important to understand these foundational approaches in mobility mentoring. And so that we've taken all of these approaches and come up with a way of working with our participants that really is based on a coaching style. It's mobility coaching for mobility, goal setting, outcomes measurement, we'll talk about an assessment about where people are and how to help them think about where they're going. And all of these elements are really very important in working with participants so that they themselves can think about their own future and move forward. You have the next slide? So understanding economic upward mobility. There are some things that we really do need to change. So the adverse structural intergenerational experiences, these are really go to, as I said earlier, this environmental issue that we talk about. How do we change the environment so that our families, their kids, these adults, can not have some of the adverse experiences they have? And I think that while all of us are very supportive of public housing, unfortunately with some of the disinvestment over time, public housing has been a kind of a challenging place for some of our families. And so how do we improve that? You know, and how do we make sure that people live in healthy environments and that they're accessible to resources and things that they need, and that their kids are moving in a pathway that's forward. So we really want to encourage a learning environment where we engage our residents so they can actualize those dreams themselves. Fixed mindsets. Again, we talked a little bit about this unconditional positive regard. We have to help our residents get out of the fixed mindsets into growth mindsets. When someone says to you, I can't do that, or that's not for me, or my kids can't do that, that's a fixed mindset. There's something that's told them, this is where you are and this is where you stay. Or someone who thinks about, and we see this, we work with a lot of families in shelter. You know, they get a public housing placement or they get a Section 8 certificate, and they think that that's the end. That's a fixed mindset. That should not be the end. That should be the beginning. Or someone goes to a TANF office and gets cash benefits, and they think that they won the lottery. No, it's the beginning. How do you leverage those things? How do you think about these things as a way of leveraging and moving yourself forward? How do you have a growth mindset, thinking about things that down in the future that you want to do? However, when you think about some of the, again, this notion of living in the moment, the crises that our families deal with on a daily basis, having a growth mindset sometimes doesn't seem very, very appropriate. They want to resolve things in the moment, but we have to get people to be expansive in their thinking around what they can do and where they can go. And then public policy that constrains opportunity and intergenerational opportunity. We really do need to talk about economic mobility in this country. I mean, I come from Massachusetts. We have one of the biggest income gaps in the country. We struggle with that. But we have to think about public policy that really does address the structural issues that put our families at disadvantage. can't blame people for some of the ways that they have to learn to navigate. We have a very siloed benefit approach here in public benefits. People have to go here for this and there for that, and have to do different things. And so how do you expect people to think about comprehensively moving themselves forward as a whole being when they have to do everything so siloed? So we really have to think about that. We have public policy that, I don't need to say anymore. I mean, we have public policy that's not exactly positive about people who don't look like maybe they look. But we have to change that, and we have to be constant and remind ourselves that it's important to do that. Because at the end of the day, we want our public benefits to move people up, not spiral them down. And unfortunately, we've got situations now where we are seeing, through multi-generational residencies in public housing, where there's no opportunity for adult children to live in the same development or to get a placement. We're seeing this sort of downward kind of spiral where the development itself winds up deteriorating or because of lack of investment, or the neighborhood, or all kinds of other issues that are going on in terms of other benefits in the environment. And so, people respond to their environment. And if you think that this is all I deserve where I live, then your ability to think beyond that is limited. So we really have to change that narrative. And that, again, I'm speaking to those of you who are going to be, that's your work, is to help people change that narrative, help them see themselves differently, and be able to make those moves upward as opposed to being stuck in this constant sort of circle, a treadmill that doesn't really lead to any place. And I realize there are challenges to that. There are economic challenges, there are housing shortage challenges, housing rent challenges, but it's something we have to work on. We can't build ourselves out of this crisis. We have to build our residents to build themselves out of this crisis. Next slide, please. So I talked a little bit about executive functioning skills, and these are the sort of the skills, these three skills here, that we do see manifested in our residents often, and we see them in ourselves when we're in a stressful situation. But the thing I think I want to say here, as I talked a little before about trauma-informed work, is that when something bad happens to you, you can resolve those issues and you can reset yourself to zero. But if you're constantly thinking about how am I going to pay my rent, how am I going to feed my kids, is the kid next door really got a gun, all those kind of things, when something happens, you never reset to zero. You're still got this little, a space occupied in your brain worrying about all of these things. So you have to remind ourselves of that. And so that, impacts our ability to remember things, to be on time for an appointment, to manage our time, manage our kids, all those things. So it's really important to remind ourselves of those things. So working memory is something that, I think all of us see manifested. People miss appointments, they don't bring the right paperwork, they forget about things they have to do. So how do you help someone build those skills? You do it, again, very simply. You remind people through texts or emails or calls about appointments. You remind them of the things they have to bring to you. You use the MI model of repeating back to people, you are going to bring these things, you said you were going to do these things, so they can, again, you're sort of reintroducing those outcomes in the conversation. You help people think about maybe getting a calendar on their phone or other kind of prompts. Because, again, our environment does impact our brain. If a crisis comes up, you forget about everything. So how do you help people build those little skills and tools to do that? Mental flexibility is one that is really important. And I think that, and it does sort of tie into impulse control. I mean, these all tie together, really. But when you live in a crisis every day, you live in the moment. And so the question is, how do you think about your life as being comprehensive and thinking about the future at the same time? So, I will show you in a minute our bridge. So we've identified sort of the 5 areas of your life that need to be working together. So your family stability, your housing and your dependents and your kids' needs, and your physical and mental health well-being, your financial management, your ability to understand how to use money, your education and what you think about education, your job or career or training, where you are, where you want to go, what you know. But those have to work together. You can't only focus on one and ignore the others. It has to be, again, an integrated, a comprehensive approach. And it needs to be future-oriented, because if you don't think about those things integrated and you don't think about it in a future-oriented way, your life is constantly in crisis. And we find that when people have constant crises, they get boxed in and are unable to think about how to plan for the future. So we have this little idea we call it, as our kind of internal joke, we call it the green edge of the wedge. And it's a way that we think about working when someone comes into our office in crisis. We acknowledge the crisis, understand the person is having a difficult time at some point, do some things like, let them talk about it for a few minutes, take a little breath, whatever they have to do, but we get right back to the work. We are here today to do these things. We are here today to work on these goals. So because we're trying to get people to think about, if you plan in advance and you work on these things, these crises go away, because otherwise there's a crisis every day. So it's really important to help people develop that mental flexibility to be able to think about things in different areas of their life, move forward, and to understand that by planning and doing things proactively, those crises can be diminished and be pushed to the side. Impulse control, I think all of us have seen people get very impulsive. I mean, we've done it ourselves where we hit the send button on occasion. But it's really, it's the environment that our families live in. And their ability to respond quickly to things, and sometimes too quickly, can really get in the way, particularly in a school or a job environment, because you really need to be able to stop, pause, think about my response. Is my response something that is internal to me, or is it part of the environment that I'm in? And give people the ability to get those skills. So we talk about these skills with our participants because we talk about them as human skills. We're not talking about, these skills are problems for you because you live in a traumatic or poor environment. These are human skills. These are things that all of us can improve on, all of us can work on. And so I think it's really important to help people understand that all of us can use a calendar, all of us can make a list, all of us need help figuring out how to solve a complex problem. And so it's really important to think about these as something that is a common bond we have with our participants, and that we expect that people can overcome and strengthen these things. So it's a very strength-based conversation around these skills. It's not one that's one of deficit. We never speak of deficits. It's really about how do we help strengthen, your skills to the point where they're helpful to you in terms of achieving the goals that you want to set. Not my goals, but your goals. The next slide, please. So this bridge to self-sufficiency, I know it's a little hard to read here, but this is really the key to our work. And this was developed in 2006, 2007, 2008 as the theory of change for empath. And it basically says that, you need to be working in all of these areas in order to achieve economic independence and your ability to make your own decisions going forward and sustain them in a way that works. And so we talked about the various places where you would start on this bridge. And this bridge was the result of a conversation that our board asked us as a staff. You work with all these people in shelter and you get them into permanent housing. Have you helped them gain economic mobility? Have they moved out of poverty? Have they been able to increase their income and their position? And quite frankly, our answer was no, we have not, because we really were not addressing the issues of economic mobility in a comprehensive way. We were focused on getting someone into permanent housing, helping them pay off a debt, helping them do those kind of things, but we weren't thinking about it comprehensively like this. And when we did this comprehensive theory of change, we realized that it really is a scaffolding. It's a way of helping someone look at this and say, I'm here, but I can go there, or I want to go here. And it's simple, it's on one sheet of paper, and we use this now as an assessment. But we use it as an assessment that the resident themselves self-assesses on it. We may not agree sometimes with exactly where a person says they are, but it's their point of view. It is that point in time where they assess themselves. And this is really very helpful in terms of how we set goals for people, because they see that, for example, if you're in shelter or you're in permanent, you're having financial problems someplace, it's not just about finding an apartment. It's about resolving some financial problems that you have, understanding where your kids are in school and where you can go. Do you have enough income to pay that utility bill? It's all of those kinds of things, and this kind of lays it out for people, so it's easy to ask those questions within this context. It also, in terms of the assessments that all of us have to do, it's a context in which you can ask questions. When you ask someone about their finances, it's not just out there in the universe. It's because you're trying to contextualize that conversation with them to help them make decisions to move themselves forward. So we find this really very helpful, and we have, if you go to our website, it's on there. You can certainly use it. But it's really been very helpful for participants to actually see where they are. And again, it's a point in time, and we understand that people change, and that as people trust you more, they may tell you more around on using this as an assessment. But it's really important because it gives people an idea of where I am and where I'm trying to go. And we have found to be a very, very valuable tool moving forward. So, next slide, please. Excuse me. So, mobility mentoring. Mobility mentoring, again, grew out of this question: have you moved anybody out of poverty? And we thought about, this theory of change, and what does it take to really work with someone to help them really gain the skills they need, not the skills I think they need, the skills they need to move forward. And so there are sort of 4 elements to mobility mentoring that we have sort of codified. One is using that bridge to self-sufficiency as a self-assessment and as an assessment tool to measure progress. So we do use that regularly. We have it up on our walls. We give it out to people to hang on their fridge. We do all of that because it's a way of, again, in a simple one sheet of paper, contextualizing where you are and where you're trying to go. So we find that really very helpful, and participants find it very helpful. Goal setting follows using the bridge. So we are big into goal setting. We use that SMART goal setting format, and I'll talk about it in a minute, but we think that goal setting is really very important because we all set goals ourselves internally. But if you've grown up learning to do that, like I'm going to ace that test, I'm in 6th grade, I'm going to get an A on that test, and I got to study, you've learned that in a sort of from your environment. But if you're in an environment where you don't learn that, you need some kind of a framework, a structure to do that. And we all say, oh, I want to get a new job, or oh, I want to move. But what does that mean? It's this open-ended, undefined sort of idea. So we use goal setting to really codify what exactly it is you're trying to accomplish, how you're going to accomplish it, and what time it takes you to get it done. And as a way of helping people start to think like that, so you don't have to write out a goal contract, but you can do it internally. But it's really a very important part of our work. And it really leads to us being able to evaluate and measure the outcomes that we achieve, and to collect data about how successful we are and how successful our participants are. So we use a lot of data collection in our work to both understand where the participant is moving. I'm sorry, I'm using participant and resident interchangeably because we do. But we do a lot of measure to understand where they're going, but also to measure the effectiveness of our own work. Are we really making progress? Are we moving people to where they need to be? Are we helping them gain the skills they need? Are we seeing the results of that progress? So data collection is very important to us. We do use incentives. Where we can, we use cash incentives, but we use other kinds of incentives as well. And coaching. So back to the goal setting a bit. I'm sorry, I'm wandering here, but do any of you set goals with your residents? Do you use any kind of a format like that, or have you? We use the SMART goals format, and we actually have added a Y to it, make it SMARTY goals, because we like the fact that the SMART goals is S for specific, M for measurable, A for attainable, R for relevant, and T for time bound. And we use the Y because we want to know why is this goal important to you? So because it really does help sort of set the context for that. But by laying out the goal in that format, the participant can easily set action steps and think about, how am I going to accomplish this? And goal setting is really an art, not a science. It's about building engagement, getting people to trust you, helping people realize what they can do themselves. So when you first work with someone, some of the goals you may set may be very small. I mean, maybe something that takes a week to assemble a number of papers, or to enroll your child in a preschool program or something like that. But they may be small steps. But again, it's this notion of, I said I want to do this, I set a time of what I was going to do, I set the steps for it, and I completed and accomplished it. So it's really a sense of sort of getting that sense of accomplishment so you can then do more complex goals. And we use, the goal setting could be tied to the programmatic outcomes you're trying to achieve, so they're within that context, but they're very important that they're the individual's own goals within that context. I talked a little bit about earned incentives. We call them earned incentives, and we have on some of our programs that are funded through philanthropy used cash as an incentive. Doesn't have to be, and for example, we have a choice neighborhood project that we're working on, and we can't use incentives as cash as incentives. But there are ways of leveraging things that you have to work with participants and residents that you can use as incentives. So one of the things that we've done, I think the FSS program is a very good example of sort of an earned incentive, where someone is actually earning more money and they're creating an escrow. So that's really an incentive to save and an incentive to build an asset. So the FSS model is a really good way of thinking about that. We've used things like if there's money available for a training program or something like that for your residents, we've asked residents to sort of pony up and be partners with us in that. What are they going to do to sort of earn that training program? How are they going to organize maybe their child care or the things that they need to do so that they can enroll in that program? So it's not just us saying, you can take this program and here's the fee for it. So it's a way of doing that. Recognition is another big way of help being an incentive. Recognizing people for the accomplishments they've made. I mean, obviously with their permission, but most people are really, really excited to share that. Again, we're working on this Choice Neighborhood project. I think Pamela Lawrence she's our contact, our program manager here at HUD. We are actually in a trailer on site at this development. And we are there in the midst of the demolition and people moving and all of these things. And a couple of lessons in terms of this notion of recognition and goal setting and things like that. We are working with them to set goals to increase their economic mobility in a very trauma-induced environment. We're telling people who have lived there for 40 years, pack up your stuff and move, and you can come back. But that is really a very, very challenging thing. So one of the things that we did is we put up one of those TVs attached to a computer that shows pictures of people. And residents have really liked having their pictures on this loop of things that they've accomplished. People getting a new job, someone's kid getting enrolled in a new school. And it's been very, so it shares with others. We had a group of women who decided to go to the gym together to help with their health and their well-being. So things like that show others that people like me can do these things. And it's really important to have that kind of recognition and ability for people to see these things themselves. So recognition is really important in this work. Sometimes just telling someone, you did it, congratulations, is something that people aren't used to getting. And so it's really important, even when a small thing, to constantly remind people they're making great strides and they're moving ahead. It really is. So next slide, please. So coaching for economic mobility. So coaching is really the foundation of our work, and it's interesting because we always thought that we were coaching until we really started understanding MI and some of this trauma-informed work that we've been doing. So I think I'm really glad that you have had the ability to have the MI training already. So coaching brings together all the things I spoke about. It brings together values, unconditional positive regard, and high expectations, so that when you work with someone, you are starting from a position of their strength and helping them move forward. It's about building a relationship. It's not something that you can do the first time you meet someone. It does take time to help people build that kind of trusting relationship with you. It's a process. You want to have a way of coaching toward the programmatic outcomes that you're trying to achieve, whether it's, again, economic self-sufficiency in a particular program you have, or in a shelter program where you want trying to get people to get into permanent housing and have enough income to support themselves, or coaching someone into solving a rent problem, how they can help figure out a budgeting plan that will help them move forward with paying back rent. All of these things are part of building this process that was within the program goals you're trying to accomplish. Tools and concrete supports. I think it's really important to have some kind of an assessment that you can help people assess themselves, where they see themselves. This notion of this goal setting, how do you help someone that has, for example, back rent? How do you set a goal around working out a rent repayment plan? What are the steps they need to take in order to do that? What kind of resources can you bring to the table to help them perhaps find someone that can help pay some of it, or negotiate some kind of payment? What kind of resources can you bring to the table? But to lay it out in a concrete fashion. We have found that when you have that, and you can have someone be consistent about honoring the steps of the agreement, you're much better off in terms of getting issues resolved. So it's important to think about those things. What attributes do you as a coach have to bring to the table? Your sense of your own self, sense of this unconditional positive regard, high expectations of yourself as well as the person you're working with. Are you a positive person? I want to be honest with you. If you're not positive, you can't do this work. You got to see that glass half full all the time. And I say this not lightly, because there are people who just they kind of go to the dark side, and you can't do that with residents who sometimes are struggling. You have to always be there to be the anchor on the side that says you can do this. So you have to be there. And you have to like people. You don't have to like everybody. I'll be honest with you, there are people sometimes you work with that maybe, they're just not your kind of person. But you got to figure out how to do that, but you have to like people in general. You can't do this work if you're a person that likes to be home alone, holed up in front of your computer. You have to do that. So for example, just as a little funny aside, we have a work from home policy at Empath. But our work is with participants, so you can't work with participants from home. So we've, kind of figured out that, okay, you can do your data entry on one day a month or something, but our work is outward facing, and we have to be there for people. The thing I think is really important, this is something we've learned from this choice neighborhood, you have to be there. Because so many times our residents have had people come in, I'm going to offer this program, I'm going to offer this service. No one shows up the first time and they say, hey, these people don't want this. That's not the case. The case is you've been there one time. You've been there once, and you pull out. And so you set the stage for the next person who's coming in. Why am I going to waste my time? They're not going to be here. You have to be consistent. You have to be there. You have to build perseverance and resilience. You've got to be there all the time. So it's really important to understand that. And there's one other thing too, I mentioned this to Dina earlier. It's also important to understand that while people may be living in public housing, it is their personal residence. This is their home. This is their family space. And that we, all of us who work with them, are invited guests. And so this notion of unconditional positive regard, high expectations, meeting people where they are, is really important because, as an invited guest, you can bring something to the table, but you shouldn't leave there letting the person's home feel diminished because of your presence. So it's really important that we think about that as we move forward in this work. Next slide, please. So how do you build a coaching relationship? Let me see what time it is here. First of all, it's really important that on the staff side that you work as a team. None of us know everything. None of us bring everything to the table that a person we're working with may need. So it's really important to have a sense of teamwork. Because the other thing too is this work can be difficult. It can be challenging. You can have days that are really, really hard. And so it's very important to have a team supportive approach within your office and where you work. And that everyone understands that, someone is there for them if they need help. And that as a supervisor, if you're a supervisor of a team working with residents, you need to coach your team the way you want your team to coach your residents. It's a parallel process. You have to be able to understand what the requirements of the work are, but you have to be able to coach your team to be able to do that. And that means helping them when they've got challenges, being honest with them around some of the strengths that they may need to develop, but always from a strength-based approach, but really being open to training and learning and coaching your staff so that they can improve their own skills to improve the skills of the people they're working with. So it's really important to have that coaching relationship with your own team. Supporting autonomy. I think one of the hardest parts of some of our public benefits is that we've taken the autonomy away from people. I mean, and so you have to go back to some place when someone was thinking about benefits or public housing or getting a Section 8 or whatever, where they made a decision, an autonomous decision, because there is always something there someplace. So, for example, this is probably for me the easier one. When someone comes into a shelter program, they come in with a couple of bags of stuff, crying kids, very upset themselves. You don't start your relationship at that point. You start your relationship the day they decided, I need permanent housing, and I'm going to go into shelter so someone can help me get it. You have to find that place of strength, because if you can't start from the place of strength, you're trying to undo lots of things, and you've got to get the person back to that. You made a decision to do this for the valid reasons of wanting housing, or you decided to get a job knowing that your income was going to go up for these reasons. How do we help you move past some of the struggles you may have, or any of the other things that you come across in working with people in housing. But it's important to get back to that position of strength so that you can build autonomy. That also means being honest. It means being clear and having clear sets of obligations. So, for example, there's a lease agreement. Everyone has a lease agreement. I would bet you that probably every public housing authority in this room manages their leases a little differently. We have to get away from that. We have to manage our leases consistently. We can't have projects like choice neighborhood projects where the public housing authority has a lease and manages it one way, and then the new developer partner comes in and uses the same lease but manages it differently. What messages are we giving to our residents? It's confusing. They can't be held accountable when you've got different messages all the time. We have to have a clear, consistent message. You can't have people be accountable if I don't have to be so accountable over here, but I got to be accountable on this side. Where do people fit into that equation? We've got to be very consistent about those things. So things about rent payment, obligations in terms of recertifications, all those things, it doesn't have to be negative, but it's got to be explained in a way that's positive so that there's a relationship built around, I understand what my obligations are. But you understand what yours are too. If you're supposed to make sure that my front door of my building is locked, then that front door should be locked. So I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but these are the things we've seen in working in public housing that build this sense of confusion sometimes for our residents. Even rent bills. I will be honest with you. If I got a rent bill from the BHA, I'm not sure I could read it because it's got, paid this, you didn't pay that, blah, blah, blah. So what do I owe? People really don't even sometimes know, because there's often a disconnect between central offices and the person working on the ground. So we have to kind of bridge that. I'm sorry, this has been my little mantra from working in choice. It's been like, I spent my whole life in housing, and I've been like, oh my gosh. But again, it's hard to hold people accountable if they can't hold the person who's managing the lease accountable. So we've got to think about these things. It's really, really important. And you want to work with your residents so they don't need you anymore. That's the whole point of all this mobility mentoring, this coaching, is that you want people to be able to build those skills themselves. They don't need you. And that is a great joy. It's a great joy when someone goes off and can move ahead and do these things without needing you. But sometimes it's just, again, this lack of information. So your information to them is really important to help them make that step. Creating and maintaining boundaries. And I talked a little bit about we're working in people's private space. In housing, this is really hard because we are working in people's homes. We are there. They live with us. We're working with them. And it's important to remind ourselves of that. And it's important to remind your staff of these boundaries because it's really important. So I'm going to go quickly through the next two slides because I always talk too much. But, public housing is a great environment for creating mobility. But we have to help change the perception of public housing. We have to support a culture that builds economic mobility within the residents, helps the residents see that they can utilize this as leverage it to move forward. Again, it's this notion that we have to support a coaching culture with the staff that work with our residents. It's very important that people come from this position of strength and help people move forward. We have to have high expectations. I don't want to keep belaboring this point, but to me, this is the most important thing. You can never say, my tenants can't do this, or those people can't do that. And I've heard this from developers. Oh, our tenants can't do that. That's not true. That's your opinion. That's their opinion. People can do whatever they set their heart to. You may have to give them some help, support, and give them information, but they can. And again, this notion of unconditional positive regard and high expectations is so important. And I know it's hard in housing, but we've got to shift these power dynamics so that people understand that they are living in a contractual obligation where there's obligations on both sides, and that they have a part in that decision making. They have a part in that ability to be there successfully and move forward in their lives. So again, I just want to wrap up a little bit by saying that the working on the Choice Neighborhood Project has really brought home to me in my career what happens when we really can work one-on-one with people, and how we can help people achieve goals that they didn't think that maybe they could achieve. So we have the first 33 replacement units coming online at the end of, tomorrow's August, in August. And they are the ones they're not on the exact site of the project, they're off-site by a couple of blocks. And we've got all 33 filled with residents from the Whittier Street development. And we are really proud of that, because to get people to think about moving off-site was a bit of a challenge. But we got people ready to take on utility debt, get rid of utility debt, take on a new utility account, be active members of a new community. And we've got 160 more to go, but we are very excited to really kind of focus on having our residents move back to a new community, but be an active participant in that new community and feel like it's their home. So thank you so much for having me. I appreciate that. Sure.
So Judy is going to join me at the table, and we're going to ask some questions. So if you do have questions for Judy, you can make your way to the mic, but I'll get our questionnaire started. So Judy, you started talking, and I heard you kind of go off script.
That's me.
About something that you think, it sounds like there needs to be some changes when we think about housing policies. And I see that slide that you have. So as Ross coordinators, and especially sometimes I know Ross coordinators or those in resident services may feel different or apart or not working with those that may be on the brick and mortar side or those that may be on, the collecting of rent side. So, or those that are policy or decision makers at housing authorities. So what policies do you see that Ross coordinators can maybe, advocate or look at to really encourage not only economic mobility, but really self-sufficiency for all that are in public housing, or those that are in tribes as well?
Well, that's excuse me. That really is sort of the crux of the issue. I think that as Ross coordinators and Ross staff, you are the voices of your residents, and you are the ones who can help your residents advocate and learn to advocate for themselves and advocate for them. So your information is really critical. When we started this Choice project, we had this issue with the development team, because we are the people working on the project. But the reality is, we were the face of the project for everybody because we were on site. And so you are the people on site with your residents. You are the face of everybody. And you need to use that power to feed back to people. That's why data is so important. Because when you have data and can give back to people who are, in the housing authorities or your state senators or Congress people about these are the things that we're dealing with, that power can be very, very, very valuable. And I think that sometimes we we underestimate how powerful we really can be. So advocacy is a big part of what we do at Empath, but we want to involve the voices of those that we're working with in that public policy and advocacy effort. So it's really important to use your data and their voices to get to those people that need to understand, because I'll be honest with you, most people are so disconnected, they really don't understand. Like I said earlier, we were working with the real estate development arm of the Boston Housing Authority, and there's this gap between them and the operations, and the gap between them on the ground. You have to be able to fill those gaps so people have really clear, good information. And data, I think, is really the way to do it.
Yeah. So how did you build out your data set? Now, first, you guys have, that one sheet, it looks intimidating, the bridge to self-sufficiency, but when you read through it, you're like, oh, this is actually really simple. Mm-hmm. So how did you get to the point of, I'm not sure if you're part of the original plan of building out that matrix, but how did you get there up until this point?
Well, again, we start with this question: have we moved people out of poverty? And when we built the bridge to self-sufficiency, I was actually not there when it was built, but I am the person who said, this is not just a theory of change, this is a great assessment tool, because we were struggling with trying to help people figure out where they were. And we started I started the first mobility mentoring program at Empath called Career Family Opportunity, which is a 5-year program based out of some of the housing developments public housing developments in South Boston. In the bridge to self-sufficiency was really eye-opening for participants, because they said, I've never seen all this on one page. I've never been able to think about how these things relate together. So that was really my role, and that was implementing as an assessment tool.
And I'm thinking this, how many PhDs do you need to build a matrix like that?
Oh, I'm the person without the PhD in my organization. I'm the person who's on-the-ground person, my hands dirty person. But we do have PhD. But it's common sense. I mean, it really is common sense. And again, we have it on our website. You can use it. People have adapted it. For example, one of the things some places, like in rural areas, have added transportation as a column. Because in rural areas, transportation, I mean, in the urban environment, you can always figure out something. But in urban areas, it's more of a challenge. Or if you live on a reservation, and transportation is a huge problem. So people have adapted it that way, and you could feel free to do that. But I think it's really very helpful.
Nice. So I know there's some burning questions out there. So if you feel free to get to the mic, or if you're joining us through live stream, feel free to also email ross-pih@hud.gov. But I do have even more questions. So I know we talked a lot about mobile mentoring, but how does, and how it relates to those that are work-able adults, but how would mobile mentoring look for those that are youth and those that are elderly and disabled residents?
That's a very good question, because we really did design it thinking, first of all, about work-able adults. But again, working in housing, you have the spectrum of people who are working there. So with our elderly residents that we've been working with, we've really used it to encourage them to make sure that they're getting their benefits correctly, that they're getting all the things that they need. Some of them have actually decided, maybe I could get a part-time job, things like that. Taking care of their health and well-being has been a big part of the work we've done with our elderly residents, because we have found that many of them have been kind of isolated and maybe don't take as good care of themselves as they need to do. So again, this group of people so for example, one of the partners in this choice neighborhood is Northeastern University. And one of the benefits that they bring to the table is that residents of this neighborhood can use their gym facilities, their workout facilities, up until 9 o'clock in the morning. Of course, no one from Whittier Street crossed the street to go to Northeastern. I mean, which I get. I mean, I understand that. So one of our staff members was talking to some of the elderly women who needed to do some more exercise and things like that, and she actually organized a group of them, and they went across the street. She met them at 7 in the morning, and they went there, and eventually one of them became the team leader, and they went themselves. But it really was focused on their health and well-being. And so we find that work across the bridge that really does help them make economic mobility in terms of their ability to, again, be healthier, manage their own finances better. We've done a lot of work with benefits and things like that. Unfortunately, we've also done a lot of work with helping them resolve family member issues, where we've had adult children, still on the lease, not living in the unit, not wanting to come off the lease. So we've really sorted through, helped them with some legal stuff. So to really increase their economic sustainability, perhaps is a better term for people who are elderly. And with youth, we've helped people figure out ways to get financial aid to get to college or to get to a training program. We have done we've referred them to some of our educational specialists to really help them starting off even in 6th and 7th grade, so that they can be focused on career things and stuff like that. So we have an intergenerational approach in this project as well, where we actually do goal setting with children and with families together, which is a pilot that we have. We're doing it at Choice, so that the kids meet with the mobility mentor and their family, and they set their own goals, and the older kids can meet on their own and set their own goals. But we do the same kind of goal setting process with them, so that they can think about the things they want to do. So you've got kids that, like I mentioned, getting an A in a class. That's been a goal for one of our kids. I was struggling in math. How do I find a tutor? How do I find time to do my homework? Where do I go to do my homework? We do a Tech Goes Home program where they go through a training class for 12 weeks and they can actually get a tablet at the end. So we've done things like that to engage people at every age bracket.
Nice. I can keep going? Okay, good. I see some head nods. Am I asking good questions? Okay, good. Assessments, can we talk about that? Mm-hmm. So I heard you refer to the Bridge to Self-Sufficiency. I would have saw it as a matrix or a way to measure outcomes, but you called it an assessment, and I thought that was really interesting and actually very simple, and actually probably not as intimidating as getting a packet. So how has that worked out when it comes to assessing residents and using something like a one-pager to assess where residents are?
This has been a source of great consternation in our organization because we have state contracts and we're required to do assessments and ask questions and get information. And I think all of you have to do that. I mean, that's just reality. But what we did is we took the Bridge and we took those questions and we laid out the questions to follow the Bridge format, so that we don't have these separate conversations. Here's your Bridge assessment, and now let's do all this assessment, or vice versa. So we integrated the questions into the Bridge because, first of all, most of the questions you ask in assessment are on that Bridge. Most of the things you're interested in about person's finances, their employment, their history, things like that, they're there on the Bridge. And the Bridge provides a context to ask the question where it makes sense, and it's not just gathering information and data. So we've done it that way. And then also, we do it as a conversation. So this is a training piece for our staff. How do you help use the Bridge in a way that builds a bridge conversation, but gives you the information that you need? And we start from the participant actually figuring out, where do you see yourself on this Bridge? And sometimes that's a daunting question to ask someone. And so we try to say, well, what are you more comfortable talking about? Your kids, or your maybe your finances, or whatever. What are you more comfortable talking about? And we start from the point the person wants to start. So there's no set. You start here and you move there. You really want it to be something that the participant owns themselves. And so by integrating those questions into that Bridge assessment, we're able to have a good conversation around where the person is and where they see themselves at that point in time. So that's how we've integrated it. So
it's a very intentional...
Yes.
Okay.
Very intentional.
My man, Jonathan.
Morning, everyone. So with adults that may be in fear of using computer with today's technology, mobile banking, things of that nature, how have you incorporated technology into your financial literacy trainings, and how often do you use these online resources, and also to incorporate what you're doing in financial empowerment?
Thank you for that question, because we have just recently really integrated technology into our programs. We have at Empath, we have each program has its own staff, but then we have a staff of what we call specialists. Education specialists, career specialists, well-being, housing specialists, and we've recently added a technology specialist, because it's really clear that if you want to apply for a job or you want to use a bank or whatever, you really do need to use technology. And so we've really we have at Choice Neighborhood Project, we have actually a former banker who leads the project there, who's really, his role has really been to help people become comfortable with banks, because many people that we've worked with, they really are very, very leery about using banks. Had bad experiences, not clear about the fees and all these other things. So he's been a great asset in terms of helping people understand that you as an active consumer can actively interact with a bank and the banker. And we've used our increasing education with people around, again, using this Tech Goes Home and various other kinds of programs to help people feel more comfortable using technology, because many people think that they have a phone and that they really know how to use technology, and that really doesn't give them access to the kind of things that we're talking about. So we have integrated technology into those conversations. We do use some online financial resources around budgeting. We use I'm going to forget the name of the program, but we use as an app that you can use for budgeting and tracking expenses. We also pull credit reports for everybody, and we work through credit reports with them, and then we use the sort of online process of pulling a credit report and understanding some of the challenges that they may see on there as another way of using technology. But we've also focused on the fact that, if you're looking for employment or you're trying to get to school, that you have to have that kind of technology base. So it's really about, number one, establishing where people are with their own sense of technology, helping people get a comfort level. For those who are really uncomfortable, we use other methods in terms of going to the bank as opposed to online banking, but really with the key toward helping people understand that they can do these things, helping me be security conscious around passwords and using technology so that they don't feel that they're more vulnerable. So things like that. We talk a lot about social media, because social media, quite frankly, we find it can be really a problem for people, because people's information gets out into an arena they have no control over. They don't know how to control social media. So again, we do a lot of work in educating people around those aspects of technology, so they can, again, feel like they're in control of it, and build a comfort level that they feel that they can use. But it's an education. But we've had even some people who have been quite elderly figure out how to use online banking when they've had mobility issues themselves. But it's about building that comfort level and helping them understand their role in using it.
Nice. So Judy is not going to leave us. I'm going to talk for a little bit. So Judy's going to step off, and I'm going to go to this podium over here.
And I'll see you again.
But can we give Judy a hand? So I've had like 3 conversations with her, and every time I think I learned something new. And it's always one thing that I think that is really important is you don't have to be the smartest person or feel like the smartest person in the room to really make things happen. And I think sometimes, when we go to these presentations and you hear key executive functions and setting outcomes, and they show you these matrices and all of these things, then you wonder, how do you put that into practice? And I think Judy and her team has done a wonderful job and putting that into practice, but also giving, I think, a voice to residents and whom they serve, and really being that liaison. So hopefully you guys feel empowered to really know that you guys can also do this work yourselves. With that, I'm probably going to talk about things that you feel like you cannot do. But you can do it. So I'm going to talk about, we're going to do some work here, but we're going to talk about really goal setting, the goals of the Ross program. We're going to talk about some key indicators or performance indicators, and we'll then eventually take a break, and standard for success will be then talked about. All right. So if you've ever been on the HUD Exchange website for Ross, have anyone ever visited that page? Nice. Have you found it to be somewhat helpful? Good. So one of the program goals that we have on there is, or program goals, and we still have it separated for families and those for elderly and disabled residents, and that is to make progress towards economic independence and housing self-sufficiency, reduce or eliminate the need for welfare assistance, and and increase earned income. So that's what we have, and that's mainly for those that are work-able adults. We want to see that they're achieving these 3 overall goals. And then for those that are elderly and disabled residents, enhance quality of life by connecting residents to services and activities, enable participants to age and remain in place, and avoid costly forms of care such as nursing homes and other institutional facilities. And I think this is really important. I was having a conversation with Tiffany Cook, right? You can't miss her. She she has purple hair, and she said she did not want to be seen, so that's why she has purple hair. We met at the networking session yesterday. So, but we were talking about those that are elderly residents and what does that look like, and I gave myself homework, and I told her, it's HUD, give me about a year to work this out. But when we talk about goal setting for those that are elderly and disabled residents, when we use the term self-sufficiency, because self-sufficiency oftentimes may be pointed towards those that are work-able adults. But she was really giving me some great insight, I believe, on when we talk about elderly and disabled residents and what self-sufficiency looks like and how it can be measured, and also what types of activities. I was like impressed. I went home thinking about it actually. So, but it's really about what Judy was also mentioning, that health and well-being, but there are also, as we know, some components of financial literacy that is really important because they're maybe on a fixed income. See, I'm repeating everything she told me. We also know that sometimes checks that they're receiving or benefits that they're receiving come after when rent is due. That's something that she also told me, which is not something that I knew. Also, that certain benefits come on random days and may not be on a fixed date. And so really, how do we think about that, and how do we measure that to really get at self-sufficiency? With that, that is my disclaimer to say that I do not have that figured out yet. So program goals by the area of need. So we talked about this yesterday. We have education, health and wellness, employment, financial literacy, substance abuse, reentry, and elderly and disabled residents. And I want to make mention, if you're not a FY18 grantee, this is probably very helpful for you to see in the direction that the Ross grant is moving as well. But these are all areas of need that I think all Ross coordinators over time has been working on. And let me just talk about that too, because I didn't really get into it yesterday, but we know that Ross coordinators do just about everything, right? And when we had the logic model you guys were doing, we were requiring you to do everything on top of choosing more things to do, right? We wanted you to do health and wellness, elderly, child care services, disabled, what else? Financial literacy, job skills, educational training, GED, a high school. I mean, you name it, we had it all in there. But what we recognized is that we wanted Ross coordinators to really be able to concentrate on the needs or the general needs of that population and not do everything because HUD said do everything. And so we really wanted to hear from you guys what was those needs that need to be addressed, and you guys focusing on that for that grant term. Now those needs can change if you apply for new funding or if you leverage more funding, as Charles was talking about yesterday, to address those other needs that may be prevalent in your communities. So the educational goal, we talked about that yesterday, residents achieving education attainment. And I think the key here is that pays enough money to support his or her housing, health care, and food expenses. For health and wellness, we have, and by the way, this is on that one-pager sheet, we want to make sure really that the family or that individual's physical or mental health does not prevent him or her from pursuing education or employment. And I really want to look into that further to really say also about aging and remaining in place and what that means. So I'm going to look into that as well and what the right language would be for that. So don't quote me on that part. Employment goal. Residents gain employment with adequate pay and benefits and maintains employment for more than 12 months. So really we want to see that there's retention there. They may not have, go from 30,000 to 70,000 within 3 years, but I think that step is that there's just maintaining employment and that they're retaining it, because we know just retention alone can be a bit difficult, right? Financial literacy. Residents' household monthly expenses that do not exceed their monthly earned income. So basically, whatever their expenses are, that they have enough money to pay for that, to support their housing, their health care, and their food expenses. And mind you, we're not getting to other types of expenses. We're really kind of honing down on more so where federal government benefits are hitting at, which is housing, food expenses, and health care, because that's where our investments are going, all right? Substance abuse. Residents with drug or alcohol dependency are receiving substance abuse treatment. Reentry, we want to see that those that are involved in the justice system. And let me also mention, being involved in the justice system may not also mean that there's a charge or, a part 1 or part 2 crime may have happened for that individual. There just may be some involvement in any way that could prevent a person from just moving forward. So when we talk about reentry, it's just not for those that are, have been incarcerated and may be coming back, but any sort of involvement that may prevent them from pursuing education or employment. We want to see those barriers removed. And those for elderly and disabled, working with elderly or disabled residents, maintaining their desired level of independence while aging and remaining in place, therefore avoiding more costly forms of care. And once again, my goal is to really work on that part and really define it in a way that I think makes sense to everyone. So I want to ask a question. You guys can take about 3 minutes at your tables to get you guys talking, because I see some of you guys are burning to talk. What are additional goals your agency or your agencies may have for Ross? So we've talked about those goals that you have. You can use that sheet to see the goals, but you may say there's some additional goals that we need to work on. For example, violence prevention or domestic violence. So what are some other goals that you think are needed in your community for you to address that maybe HUD is not necessarily requiring? So you can take 2 minutes or 5 minutes to talk about that at your tables. Okay. Thank you. Should I be talking? right. So we can come back together. So I want one person to shout out, what's another goal that you think you want to add on top of what Ross said? You could shout it out. Transportation. Transportation as a goal, and that's because transportation seems to be an issue and a barrier to remove in order for folks to not only receive services, but just to go throughout life, right? All right, what's another one? Was childcare, right? The removal of that barrier, childcare. We talked a lot about that yesterday, and I kind of knew about it, but I guess I didn't really think about it. The chicken before the egg. It's a work requirement. Normally with childcare, do you work first and get childcare? But I can't go to work if I don't have childcare. How does that all work out? And I think what Judy was talking about when we talk about public policy, right? These are some of the things that we have to think about when we are, and I mean, we're in that place too here at the federal government, but really think about when we talk about these work requirements, how sometimes work requirements may also may be a disincentive for those that are trying to move to work. So I want to talk about key performance indicators. These will be fairly new, and they will be on the PowerPoint slides, and I will send this to you guys also. And by the way, everything that we're talking about now, we're hoping that this will be an exercise that you guys can continue to do so that you're not feeling that you have to figure it all out today, okay? Does that go, whew, right? All right. So we have some key performance indicators for those that are serving. So many of you guys selected specific areas of need that you wanted to address. And so it's really about you guys just working solely or reporting more so on those key indicators or those goals, on those areas of needs and really hitting at these key performance indicators. So those that are working on education, can I see you raise your hand? Perfect. So it's about residents with, so some key performance indicators on top of the goals that we have is residents without a high school or GED attaining a high school diploma or a GED. We have residents receiving a higher education or a license certification. Residents enrolled in educational or vocational programs, and residents receiving educational related services. So this is something that when we look at your reports, we want to see some of these key performance indicators are happening throughout your grant term. Now, mind you, I'm going to start here to say we did not say, 10% of your residents with a high school or without a high school degree attaining a high school or GED. So those type of specifics are not in here, but we want you to get to the place where you're starting to track those key performance indicators, and we're seeing some movement throughout your grant term. Health and wellness. Residents without health insurance obtain health insurance. Residents going to medical examinations at least once every 12 months, and that's really about preventative care because there's research that shows that going to the doctor and doing those regular checkups could prevent certain illnesses or sicknesses from happening. Residents receiving health-related services, and residents with less emergency room visits. And how many people are working on health and wellness? Nice, so it's a good number of you guys. Financial literacy, which I think everyone's working on financial literacy, right? Because I want to say there's about 93 of you guys that chose financial literacy. So residents receiving EITC, which really is an indicator that that person is working. And that there's some earned income that's also coming in. Residents with no financial, and let me also say this, that EIT also, I feel like there's some myths about it, right? And when I start working, I really don't want to go and get my taxes filed, and the government learn all my business, and I'm just scared because I just don't want that type of energy right now, right? So I think when we talk about some of these indicators, we're also talking about some of the myths that come with these indicators. So just don't see it as the literal, but really it also indicates some other aspects to that individual's lifestyle. So residents with no financial account receiving a financial account. We talked about how banking institutions may be intimidating or the barriers that come with that. Residents receiving financial literacy and management-related services. Employment, how many folks are working on employment? Right, and I would imagine that's many of you guys that are serving work-able adults. Employed residents receiving employment, employed residents retaining employment for more than 12 months, residents with a part-time employment receiving full-time employment, and residents receiving employment-related services. And mind you, we're not only tracking some outcomes, but we also see as a coordinator that your outcomes is just the mere fact that a resident went and did a service, right? Because we know that there are sometimes even barriers with services. For example, childcare could be a barrier for someone not going to an employment or job-related service. Transportation can be an issue with a person not going to a job skill or training class. Substance abuse. Residents experience substance abuse receiving substance abuse treatment. How many people in here are experts on substance abuse? Yeah. Right. So, I mean, this is an area in housing that we're not necessarily skilled in. I don't know, step 1, step 2, step 3 with working for those that do substance abuse treatment or have a substance abuse issue. So that is something that will need to be referred out. So really right here is just making sure that they're actually getting that treatment or those services, and as well as looking at the health and wellness goals, because that is that could be seen as a health issue as well, or addressing some health-related issues. Reentry, residents with criminal history receiving legal aid, and so we're being very intentional about those that do have some criminal history, that they're receiving legal aid because of some of the barriers that need to be removed just for that. And I think Maisha yesterday was talking about that and giving some light to that. And also see the employment and education indicators that we have for there. And elderly and disabled residents, residents receiving elderly and disabled related services, residents receiving SSI and SSDI. Basically, we want to make sure that folks are aware of the benefits that they get, and as well as also, I think I was learning from the table, there was Tiffany, there was, give me your name again, from Alabama, Jessica. We were talking about just the mere fact that they may be paying more, they may be paying less for something, they're not getting their full benefits. So really also understanding that they can, what their benefits are, and are they obtaining their benefits so that they can remain in place, and also seeing those health and wellness performance indicators. So for a moment at your table, I do have another question for you. So what are other key performance indicators your program would like to add? So for example, you guys, we said employment for 12 months. You said, what was another one? I'm losing it. Residents receiving EITC. So what are some other indicators that you may see that really gets at whatever areas of need that you're addressing? So you can take 5 minutes at your tables to discuss that, and you'll be surprised what others may come up with. Great. So we can come back together. So one or two people can shout out, what are some other indicators that you think can be added? You could say the area of need you're speaking of and what other indicator you think would be a good add-on.
Social skills and community engagement.
Local skills and community engagement.
Social.
Social skills and community engagement. And let me say that I believe there's a guy named Ken House. Is he here? Yeah, he calls me and he talks to me about this type of stuff. Like, just you don't measure engagement or the qualitative side to Ross. And so I think that's a really good point to make. It's great meeting him, by the way. What else? Give me one more. I think I heard something. Increase in income. So yeah, that's a great indicator of that someone is just increasing their income. That's a great indicator. So we're actually going to go into a larger exercise and spend some time on that exercise. So I'm going to invite up Judy, who's going to lead the exercise. And this is really, like I said, to get you guys thinking. So when you guys go home and you guys have plenty of time to do what you guys do, you guys can start to build out, at least start the process of how you begin to shape your programs to not only do the activities that you're doing, but to also measure your activities in an efficient way.
So we talked a little earlier about, goal setting and how we would set goals. So a couple things. I want to go back to some of the performance indicators that Trey was talking about. It is really good if you, and again, I don't know how much assessment data you have on the families participants you're working with. If you can kind of set some internal programmatic goals for yourself. So if you, for example, if you see that 30% of your participants do not have a high school diploma or GED, you may want to say that, over the course of the next year, we'd like to see, 5% of those or 10% of those get a high school diploma or GED, based upon obviously your knowledge of what your population is and what the resources are available and what your staffing can allow. So just say it's good to be able to do that. Sometimes it's hard the very first year, but you can, over time, for your own track record, be able to do that. And it does help you focus where you put your resources. So there are a lot of key key indicators that Trey talked about. So you have to kind of think about which ones are the most relevant to your own environment and how you want to work on all of them, but there's some that are really important. So we just conferred for a moment, and so let's think about some well-being and health and wellness as one of the areas that we're going to talk about goal setting. Because I'm sure that all of you struggle with families and participants who have health issues. So someone comes into your office and is looking for a job, but the person is a diabetic. And they're diabetic and they're not really taking good care of themselves. They're not clear about, what they should be doing, how often they should see the doctor. They're struggling with, some health issue related to being diabetic. And so but again, they come in, they would like to get a job. They need more income. So in terms of coaching that person, you would want to say, okay, so you're interested in getting a job, but in your current situation, can you reliably be able to go and report to work on a daily basis or whatever the schedule is, knowing that you're telling me you're having some challenges with your diabetes? So, and this is actually a real story that we've had working with a woman who had this situation. So, the first goal we would want to set is to get a treatment plan in place for her to be able to take care of herself. So, again, obviously, this is something she'd have to tell you that she wanted to do in order to do that. This is her goal, not me telling her. But it's important to sort of start at the beginning. What is the issue? So the first questions we'd want to ask, we'd want to know more about, are there some barriers to her? Does she have health insurance? Does she have a primary care physician? Does she have access to the kind of food that she's supposed to eat? Is she on some kind of a program? Whatever questions you think are really irrelevant if she's telling you about the situation. And then from there, you want to pick out where you're going to start. So perhaps the person does not have health insurance. So the first goal you would want to set with her is to obtain health insurance. I guess, do most people here have health insurance? Let me ask that first. Most people, participants have health insurance? I come from Massachusetts, we all do, so. Anyway, so again, you can go to that SMART goal thing up. So in terms of thinking about the goal, so we want to write a SMART goal. So we want it to be specific. So we would start with, okay, again, these are the elements that we want in the written goal itself, these 5 elements. So specifically, we want, Lori Jones to have health insurance. That's the first thing. We would measure that by saying that she obtained health insurance, she have a health insurance card. It's attainable because it's something that's available to the population that we have in the location where we are. It's relevant because it's something that's important to her health and her ability to move forward. And we want to put a time limit on that. So we'd like to say we'd like you to have you to obtain health insurance within 30 days. So if that seems like the reasonable time, maybe it's 2 weeks. I'm just going to use 30 days as a sort of a number. So what are the steps to doing that? First of all, does she have identification? Does she have the information that she needs to go to the organization, the agency, to get health insurance? So does she have her ID? Maybe she's a birth certificate. What other documentation does she need? If she doesn't know, or you don't know, that you may want to find out from the agency what documentation that she needs if you don't already know that. So her first action step would be to assemble the required documentation. Her second action step would be to make an appointment if an appointment is necessary to do that. So then she has a challenge with transportation. How is she going to get there? This location is not close to where she is and she doesn't have a car. So the next step would be to identify, is there someone in her network, someone that she knows that could help her get there? If there's not, does she have someone does she have the cash or the ability to pay for transportation to get there? Is there some public transportation that she could use, some kind of a ride for people who have health issues, because there are some of those available in various locations. But that third step would be to identify how she was going to get there. So she has kids. The question then becomes, if the appointment is a time when she does not have childcare, who could watch her kids for her so she could go to that appointment? Or is it appropriate to bring her children? So she'd have to again identify what she would do for childcare. And then, obviously the last step would be to actually go to the appointment, complete all the paperwork, get everything done so that she can receive her health insurance. But you really want to step it in very, very specific increments like that so that it's clear what she needs to do. You don't want a goal that has more than 4 or 5 action steps, because then it gets too complicated. So that maybe if you're in a real rural area and transportation is a real challenge, then perhaps getting transportation is a goal of itself, so that you could then set up some steps how the person would obtain transportation to get to where they need to go. So it's sort of, it depends on where you are in the complexity of what it takes to get there. So she goes and she gets her health insurance. What would be the follow-up goal to something like that? Follow-up goal would be to make an appointment with her or to choose her primary care physician, but to make an appointment and to be there at the appointment. And the thing is, we don't have to do all this work, does that all done sequentially. You can do some of that concurrently. So while she's looking for health insurance, you may want to talk to her about what kind of job are you looking to get? What are your skills? What interests you? Is it full-time? Is it part-time? Things like that. So you can start working, again, like I said, on that bridge across those multiple domains. But maybe the first goal for her in terms of seeking employment is to actually figure out what she wants to do. Or does she have experience in working someplace that she wants to build on to continue to go forward? Or maybe she was working as a CNA and decides, really, I'd like to get more skills and become more a medical assistant or a medical something or other. Are there places for her to get more training that she could use to get a better job going forward? So goal setting is not a one goal at a time kind of process. It is an integrated process, and we want to set goals that are again, very relevant and specific to what the person is trying to do, but in a way that you can outline those action steps so the person can actually follow along and get them accomplished. Is that helpful, or should we do another more complex one? Is that helpful? And I know sometimes it seems like simple, but again, for someone who's really struggling with things, it is important to be able to lay them out. It truly is. And again, I think that it's helpful to have each action step identified for them. I mean, some of the other complex problems, I don't know, financial literacy, I'm sure, is a challenge. You know, again, pulling a credit report. You know, so if someone is trying to, you know, has some budgeting issues and finance issues and is having a struggle living on their income, is to actually get the credit report and work through it with them. So the first goal may be to obtain your credit report and identify and understand the credit report, so that you can actually understand where you are. So when you talk about spending more money than you take in, you can see the impact that has on your credit report and what that credit report does to you moving forward. So, you know, a lot of this goal setting, particularly in the beginning, is about giving people information that they can then, you know, use to figure out where the impact it has on the things that they're trying to accomplish. So that's what our job is to give them that information and help them figure out where it's relevant and what works. But financial goal setting is actually sometimes, I think, one of the easier ones to do, because if you're really talking about very concrete information, you're talking about numbers, you're talking about things that are not subjective, but they're facts on a page. And I think it's important to be able to sometimes, for some people who struggle with that, to be able to do something that's really very concrete like that. Any questions? But again, I think with goal setting, it's to, you know, the first goals are really around engaging and figuring out, you know, what, again, like we said with the very first example, someone wants to get employment, but the first job is to get health insurance. The first goal is to get health insurance because the person has a medical condition they need to work on. So it's being an active listener and listening through that conversation so you can pick up those threads. And then again, the notion that you don't have to set goals sequentially necessarily, but you can set them concurrent so people can be working on things they want to work on as they're moving sequentially through some of the more complex goals. So I hope that that's helpful. But I do suggest if you're going to really engage in goal setting, to come up with some kind of a one sheet, I don't know, say we call it a goal contract, but something that really is on one sheet that says this is the goal, these are using some kind of a format that you want to use, why the goal is important to you, how you'll know when you finish and you'll attain it, how you as staff will collect the data on that goal so you'll have it for yourself, and that the person can own the process. Okay, thank you very much.
So I think it will be, I think she walked through, like, if you were to use or are working on a health and wellness area of need or financial literacy, kind of what those steps could look like. But I think we also want to know, for your overall ROS program, also what goals are you setting for your larger ROS program, and how you're making sure you're measuring your program in the sufficiency. So we want to talk about measuring performance. So we discussed the resident needs assessment. It's not something that HUD is requiring for you to submit to HUD each year, but this is something that we ask that you do each year, or at least we'll prescribe it. We'll tell you or suggest or encourage when you should do that. But this is something you've done it in the beginning of the grant when you apply for funding, but at least by the end of the grant, doing another assessment to see, have perceptions changed? Is that area of need being shown differently through our data? How are residents reacting to the services that are now in place? Do they even know that those services are there now that they thought were lacking before? And those questions could come through that assessment. And you can use the same sample assessment that you used in your application to really sort of measure how that or how those needs have maybe changed, or if the lack of those needs are still a lack, or if they've been addressed. So I've talked about seeing the sample needs assessment, and what I'll do is I'll also email that back out again for folks that may need that, along with our slides today. And I already mentioned that it's not a part of your annual report. So this is just something that we're encouraging you guys to do. Oh, and one more point to make about this, that the community needs assessment that I'm talking about is really assessing the needs of residents, and there's another layer to that is really assessing the needs of that individual. So I want to understand the two. There is the larger community need, and that's how you guys base where your areas of needs are. But then there is those individual assessments where you really get to see the need of that individual, and then how do you address that. And so I want to make sure that you understand the separation of those two, but how they're also linked to each other. So measuring performance. So HUD requires grantees to develop an effective, quantifiable, outcome-oriented plan for measuring performance and determining that goals have been met. That's just HUD jargon, basically, to just say, we want to make sure that you're measuring what you're doing. So what are your outcomes? What are the outcomes that you're looking at? So we talked about those goals and your key performance indicators. So that's what we're asking you. What are your goals? What are your indicators? What are you trying to achieve over time? And what are some outcomes that you're liking to see? So can someone shout out to me what some outcomes you'd like to see in your programs? Nothing? And participation, that's an outcome. The fact that a resident is now participating in the program, and we'll get to that, but what that'll look like in the Standard for Success data elements is a ROS participant is one that received an intake assessment, and at that point, they're a ROS participant. What is another outcome you would like to see in your programs? Increased savings. I don't think we can track that yet, but the increase of savings, we can see maybe they opened up a savings account or they opened up a checking account, and that can be an indicator that there's some savings going on. What's one more outcome? What's that? Mortality rate. I think that is something we can track, but not necessarily through the ROS program. We haven't opened that up yet. But you're right, mortality rate is seeing that has decreased over time. It could be an indicator that health and wellness is being addressed. So what are you tracking? So we named some things that also we can track to see how we're doing with that. I had a friend that we were, he's a good friend of mine. I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to tell this story to describe him. But he's a good friend of mine, and every time I see him, he's like, boy, I just don't know how I got this job. I got a good old job. And he's very serious because he doesn't have, his story is he barely had a high school diploma, and now he's a director of resident services, and he has, a huge department. And when he saw me come into the office, he's like, man, you young. I had to fight all my life to get to this place, and now look at you. And I was like, okay. But I was asking him one time because I was getting a little stuck on a project, and I was like, I'm trying to track, we were having some issues in our neighborhood with substance abuse, and particularly these folks were drinking in a public park where we were trying to, the community was complaining about it. And so we wanted to really not only address the issues of the park and making sure that it wasn't seen necessarily as a hangout spot and for either illegal activity or stuff that may be not wanted by the community, but also addressing those needs of those folks that were in the park because they were coming there for a reason. So we were figuring out stories and hearing their stories, and we were seeing that this neighborhood is gentrified over time, and these folks grew up in the neighborhood, so we're like, wow, that added to the story. But then we also recognized that there was alcohol dependency there, and some real trauma and some real things that I didn't necessarily have the skills to address. So my executive director, I call her, she could be seen as a HUD person, but she started saying, how can we track this? And we need to track this in Salesforce. And I was looking at her, and if anyone knows anything about Salesforce, how do you track anything in Salesforce, right? You guys may be saying that about Standard for Success, but and I asked a good friend of mine, well, I'm trying to track, how this person is doing, because we're not going to know if they're less alcohol dependent over time. And really what he got at was, well, what we can track is employment. What we can track is if they got a job, or if they seen some increase in earnings, because really it wasn't necessarily about seeing that they have less alcohol dependency, which is that's something what we want, but we're also seeing movement in another area that was once lacking. And so I want you to also understand that there's sometimes some goals that you may have in place where you may have to look at other indicators to see if that's also moving, in order for you to see how you're doing in another area that may be unrelated. Another one could be domestic violence. Another one could be violence prevention when it comes to health and wellness. I don't want to go outside. We found out people didn't want to go play basketball because they were concerned about violence. They didn't want to ride bikes because they were concerned about violence. So an increase in bikeability or walkability in the neighborhood was huge, because then we were seeing, crime is actually going down, and that's why people are biking more. This is why people are walking more. So just had to say all that to say, what are you tracking? What tool are you using to track? So Judy talked about that bridge to self-sufficiency, which could be a tool, and you guys also have the Inform tool, which is a plug for what we're going to talk about next. But what tool are you using to track your outcomes, and what are your milestones? And HUD hasn't given you any milestones to say, in year one, we want you to work with 50 people. We want to see that 5 of them are employed. We want to see that 5 of them receive health-related services. So we really want you guys to tell us what those milestones are. And with the Ross program, for those that had funding prior to FY16, you guys know that you guys really created those milestones, which you set goals in the logic models, and then you said each year how you're doing against those goals. So the Ross Data Guide, I just want to mention that. How many of you guys paid attention to the Ross Data Guide, read it? Great. And so I know I get a lot of questions, and I'm going to sound like Charles right now. Knock, knock, knock. I'm coming at your door. Because the Ross Data Guide, has anyone found it to be helpful? Yes, because it really it gives a description for each data element. It tells you what's required, which data element is required of you to report on, and gives you tips on how you may want to answer that. It is a 34-page document, but I promise you that you're probably not looking at all 34 pages unless you're working on every area of need that you're trying to address. So some things that I want to just say here. It has a list of the data elements grantees can track. Data elements are not on the list. If data elements are not on the list, you will not need to track that. That is a typo there. It includes descriptions and comments for each data element. It includes which data elements are required for the areas of needs you selected. If you choose not to respond to any optional data elements, you'll put not collected. So that's, for example, if you chose to do health and wellness and elderly and disabled, if you have employment data elements that are showing up, you're just going to select information not collected. And when we walk through the tool, you'll see what that may look like. If you're required to respond to a data element, HUD expects that you will not select information not collected. So for example, if you're working on employment, we're going to expect that those required data elements do have a response to it, and that you're not selecting information not collected. If a data element is required but not seen in your reporting tool, for example, emergency room visits, right? If you see that in the Ross Data Guide, you should prepare to track this information even if it's not in the tool itself. So for example, I think we have a couple of data elements that I put in the Ross data guide, but it's not currently in the tool right now because for whatever reason we're planning to use that for your future reporting. If you see that it's in the data guide but not in your tool or your template, don't stress out. Don't say it's not here and oh my God, Trey, I'm going to lose my mind. Take a breath and wait for next year because it'll be there starting November 1st. All right? All right. Grantees may visit the Standard for Success website to find webinars, training material, FAQs, data integrity manuals, and other helpful information. Let me also say this. I am one that learns better when I'm sitting in a room and I can hear someone talking to me. I am not the biggest fan of webinars. But I will say the webinars have been helpful to me because I'm not the owner of Standard for Success. The Ross team does not necessarily own the program itself and really sees it through. It's another office of ours. But the trainings have been really helpful, and I had to watch some of the trainings more than once. And I will also say that it also was very helpful just to get in a tool. With that, I know many of you guys have questions about how can I get into the tool itself or have an account with Grant Solutions, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But one of the things that we want to make sure that we saw as a mistake for grantees that reported last year is to make sure you're not including personal identifying information in that in your reporting tool. So for example, a person's last name, their address, we want to make sure you're not putting that in the report because HUD cannot accept that, and you'll have to then change all of that and resubmit it back to HUD. So we want to make sure no personal identifier information is in your reports. So when you're choosing that data element that says person identifier, you can say A241091. It's just a random number, and you're making sure you're tracking who that person is through your own case files. If you need access to Grant Solutions, the Inform tool, you can email ross-pih@hud.gov. How many people need access to the tool? Great. So is there more people? Can I really see it so I can get an idea of how many people I'll be? Okay, gotcha. So that means majority of you guys already have access to the tool. Great, so you guys can go ahead and get started. Whew. I thought I was gonna have a bunch of emails, but for those that do need it, you're gonna email the Ross mailbox, and Thaddeus is gonna talk about this in a few too, but you're gonna also complete a form, which I can email you that form once you email me, for a user request form and submit that to the Ross mailbox, and I will make sure that the team that is working on that, Grant Solutions team, is seeing that through. And if you are using Ask Online, Family Metrics, and any other case management software, I think we have questions about, I'm using this software, how do I report in it? HUD, I see the person who asked me, nodding their head. HUD, that's a third party, and so we don't know their case management software. What they've done is try to adapt as best they can their systems to our system. What we do give them is our data elements that we're looking to track, but how that works and how their tool works, you really have to reach out to that third party to figure out how that works. So for those that are using Ask Online or Family Metrics, I think it's Pangea Foundation. So if you go to Pangea Foundation, you can find their information as well. And I know that they do webinars as well for those that use Ask Online or Family Metrics. And I just want to say one last thing before we go on break, that we are creating a Ross dashboard. And what this is, we're in the very beginning stages of that. And I think a few of you guys in the room may be a part of this stakeholders team that are helping to form this, but it's really a way in which we plan to look at those key performance indicators, put them on a web tool so you can see how you're performing against those key performance indicators. And what we'll do is use your data from year to year to really create a dashboard that looks at those key indicators. So for example, one of the key indicators was employment. You can see how many people or what was the key indicator? It wasn't employment. It was employment for more than 12 months. So you can see in the dashboard how many of your residents that you are serving have retained employment for more than 12 months. We're in the very beginning stages of this, and so we want to make sure that we put it out there for those that are on the live stream and for you guys to know that we're not just going to leave you high and dry when it comes to measurement, but we are planning to develop a tool and hopefully in the next few months that you guys can use to track your programs as well. So I'm going to invite up Dina to give some logistics before the break.
Thanks, everybody. Let's thank Judy and Trey with a nice. That was really great information. So we're going to break soon. Just two things. We're going to pass around an evaluation for the conference, so we'll put it on your tables if you don't mind, filling it out before you leave, and you can just leave it on the table. And the other thing is, as we promised, there's going to be a list of the field office grant administrators, which we will also pass out to you. The break is 15 minutes. Stretch your legs, go get some fresh water, use the restrooms, and be back here for the next session. And thank you.